Welwyn, 1970, and straight away something to remind us that things don't change all that much. New roads, bypasses and link roads may be talked of and will probably be here eventually. But in the meantime, loads like this enormous retort grind their way through the village to avoid low bridges and make their way back onto the main A1 road to London. It's the people who live in the village itself who are mostly affected by the heavy loads, which if you're behind them seem to be inching their way forward, fussed over by their attendants and looked after by the police. But with the start of the new motorway to replace this stretch of road, everyone is going to be affected. Life around Welwyn is going to be more difficult as the major roadworks begin. Life as they knew it for some people is going to be impossible. The new motorway, for example, is going to sweep away this garden. The garden of Jeeves Cottage on Digswell Hill. It's a garden which has been tended by those who've lived in the cottage over 400 years of Welwyn history. Now the cottage itself and its pleasant country garden are to disappear. Mrs. Trench Watson, who has lived here for 17 years, is having to move. But when she does move, she does hope to take much of her garden with her. A Sunday morning, Welwyn Fire Service is practicing for the real thing. The siren on top of the fire station is the signal to the part-time volunteers to go into action. The alarm could be anything from a bonfire out of control to a major disaster, and they have to be prepared to move quickly to tackle it, whatever kind of fire it is. Welwyn Fire Service is a retained unit, as it's called. The volunteers who have other jobs during the day are paid a retainer of £60 a year. This appliance is manned by a minimum of 5 men, but they do occasionally turn out with 4. Ladder drills, of course, are part of the fireman's training. There are 2 extending ladders on this appliance, one of them of 35 feet and the other 15. The appliance carries 1,500 feet of rubber-lined hosepipe. Its 2 pumps enable it quickly to pour hundreds of gallons a minute onto a fire. One pump, worked by the road engine, can supply 500 gallons a minute. The other, a lighter pump, can be used from a stream or a pond, say, to supply up to 250 gallons a minute. The appliance itself carries a tank of 400 gallons to enable it to get straight into action wherever the fire may be. They're not using it today, but the appliance can also put out up to 300 gallons of foam compound a minute onto fires where they need it. The service likes the firemen to be in for 20 to 30 years. As the years go by, they receive small bounties at 15, 20 and 30 years. The service needs recruits, particularly those who could be available for calls during the day. In Welwyn, they train every Tuesday for 2 hours in the evening. Another training session is nearly over. One of the most important things a fireman has to know, not unnaturally, is exactly where he can find water. He has to get to know his area, which houses have underground water tanks, which houses have swimming pools which could supply vital water in an emergency. It's part of his training to familiarize himself with this kind of information. All the firemen go through a pretty rigorous training too, in ladder drills, pump drills, the use of the breathing apparatus which is carried in their firefighting vehicle. They keep their equipment at the fire station ready for when they might need it. The men turn out when they hear the siren, but after 10:30 at night, when the siren cuts out, bells ring in the men's own homes. All the volunteer firemen are qualified in first aid to cope with injuries they may meet on the spot in the chaos of collapsing burning buildings. Another part of their training is to visit factories and buildings in the area where there may be special risks of fire. Only a few members of Welwyn Fire Service actually work in the village, which means only a few are available for calls during the day. Sunday morning, and in the calm of the Minor Operations Clinic at the Queen Victoria Memorial Hospital, a young patient is about to lose a verruca. It's a little one, but it's a nuisance, and she'll be glad to get rid of it. A local anesthetic, and then what's going to come next won't hurt a bit. A gentle touch of diathermy and the verruca has gone up in smoke. Another Sunday morning minor operation successfully completed. This minor operations clinic is a service available in Welwyn less well known than some of the others. It's run by the local doctors at the outpatients department of the hospital, where nursing help and sterile conditions are available for the treatment of small complaints which can be treated quickly. This operation is for the removal of a small cyst on the back of the patient's neck. Once again, with a local anesthetic, it didn't take long, and a couple of stitches, and the job's done with the minimum of fuss. During 1970, Welwyn Youth Club was host to members of the Rural Council who visited the club to watch its various activities, noisy and quiet. Club nights, with refreshments available, are at the youth centre on Welwyn playing fields. The rural councillors, with their chairman, Councillor Sanders, were able to meet the members of the club and talk to them about the time they spend there. To those who have yet to reach the age when dancing is all important, the youth club offers rather gentler pursuits. Mr. Topham is the full-time professional leader. One of the activities in 1970 was preparation for the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, which involved instruction in climbing and survival techniques, in this case, how to use ropes. During 1970, the face of Welwyn went on changing, the old and established occasionally giving way almost imperceptibly to the new. There's a change here. Wellingham's, the grocer's, closed. The shop, with its protected facade, and the house are to be the home of a computer services firm. How many people in the Connecticut Road noticed the disappearance of the old-style street lighting? During the year, the workmen moved in, and the old lighting gave way to the modern. Another quiet change. Butcher's cycle shop closed, and Johnson's expanded. Where Downing's closed last year, a new business sprang up. This is the village's first launderette, offering a new service in the high street. Men make changes quickly. Nature takes its time, and it's going to be some years before we see the benefits of what these youngsters are doing on Whitehill's playing fields. They're children from St. Mary's Junior School who are helping to plant 90 trees. This was the first part of a planting program in which Scotch pine, larch, Norway maple, hornbeam and hawthorn trees were planted. Next year they'll be planting more. The children grew the young trees in their tree nursery at school. During 1970, two of the village's best-known members of an older generation retired. Dr. Ada Marion Dancy had been in general practice in Welwyn for 46 years, together with her husband, Dr. Charles Brandon Dancy. They came to the village from London, where Dr. Charles was a registrar at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. Their two sons are both in practice in the village. Much of a Welwyn doctor's work is done at the village's own cottage hospital, where we saw the outpatients clinic a few minutes ago. The hospital has 30 beds, but it is now facing problems which make it difficult for the doctors to admit their medical cases and meet their operating commitments. The problem is age. The QVM has provision for 2 long-stay geriatric patients. There are now more than 12. Geriatric nursing staff normally get an extra £100 a year. The nurses at the QVM do not. The problem is this: 11% of us are over 65 now. Soon it will be 14%, and the requirement for geriatric beds is becoming more acute. When a family finds it impossible to cope, the elderly must go into hospital. What home help services there are overstretched. And if someone wants a home help for an elderly relative, it's doubtful whether they'll get one. These are difficulties which are being faced not only in Welwyn but all over the country, where people, doctors and others try to help with sympathy and understanding. One way in which others try to help in Welwyn with understanding and with effort in voluntary work is in the operation of the Meals on Wheels service. The object is to deliver a good hot meal to the elderly, the sick, the disabled and the housebound, and it's a service which is widely appreciated. The scheme was started in 1960 by the Women's Voluntary Service, as it then was. It's now the Women's Royal Voluntary Service. The meals are prepared in the kitchens at the Frith. Originally they were supplied by ICI. When Unilever came to the Frith, they continued to supply the meals for the scheme as they do today. At first, deliveries were made to people's homes from the kitchens on 2 days a week. Now, and for the last 8 years, they've been taken out on 3 days every week. The service is run in Welwyn by Mrs. Mugford. The meals cooked in the Frith kitchens are placed in charcoal-heated hot boxes and delivered around the district by women volunteers working in teams of 2. The driver and the helper use their own cars and operate entirely on a voluntary basis. Since the scheme began, the teams have never failed to go out with the meals, whatever the weather. To give an idea of the scope of the service, in 1969, getting on for 3,000 meals were delivered. The idea is that people who otherwise might not get a hot meal should have one at a reasonable price. Those who get the meals pay 1 3 a time, as they did when the scheme started. The balance of the cost of the meals is made up by a subsidy from Welwyn Rural District Council. The Women's Royal Voluntary Service points out that helpers, like these ladies, particularly those with cars, are always welcome to take the meals to the old and housebound people. On the face of it, there isn't much connection between a horse show, a gymkhana on a field in Woolmer Green, and the old people of Welwyn Rural District. There is. The gymkhana is one of the ways used by the organisers of the Woolmer Green Over 60 Club to raise funds. This event turned out to be a very pleasant day. It had all the gymkhana events from donkeys to show jumping. The Woolmer Green Over 60 Club members themselves ran the refreshment tent. Their club had a most successful year. With so many privately owned horses and ponies in the Welwyn area, a gymkhana of this kind was bound to attract a great many entries and prove extremely popular. And there was refreshment for the horses too. The donkey carts are always an attraction for the spectators who haven't themselves horses and ponies or sons and daughters competing in the various events. And for the youngsters, one event in which they or their mothers with an inventive sewing box could shine was the fancy dress competition, on horseback of course. Just look at some of the creations dreamed up for the judges to look at. And for the horses themselves.
Now the ring is between the cycle on Bobby.
This was a good day out, this gymkhana in Woolmer Green, and it was for a good cause, helping people much older than those who were able to take part to get more out of the evenings of their lives. Well, there's one thing certain here. Even the over 60s, if they're fit and well, know how to enjoy themselves. This is the Woolmer Green Over 60 Club annual party, which finished off a successful year with a kick and a flourish. The guitarist kept things going at the party, which involved the members in games, and for some of them in winning prizes. A presentation here from Mrs. Swinsko, the chairman of the club. The members here could look back on a year of activities like visits to a panto, the seaside, a theatre, evening excursions and garden teas in attractive local gardens. Well, the guitarist certainly kept things going and had the feet tapping too. And he deserved his own refreshment too. 6 years ago, the members started to save for a new clubhouse, and they now have about £2,000. Now they're going to use part of the money to furnish and equip a community centre to be built by the council, which makes a new clubhouse unnecessary. And part of the cash will be shared among those who helped to raise it. Welwyn Rural District is well off for clubs for older people. This is the Christmas party of Welwyn Jubilee Old Folks Club, which meets on Mondays and Thursdays throughout the year. The president is Mr. Simmons. As usual this year, there were the parcels of Christmas foods for the members to enjoy, as well as some entertainment that for many of them would revive old memories. It occasionally happens that members who meet at the clubs marry. At this party this year, the other members congratulated one couple who did and who received a bouquet from the President Lady Brockett. The singers, who were reviving old music hall memories for the Jubilee Club members this year, called themselves Katie's Capers. They're all housewives from St. Albans. The third Welwyn Club for older people is Welwyn Friendship Over 60s Club. As you'd expect, there was a Christmas party, and very good it was too. The club was formed in January 1967 and opened with a membership of 65. At the end of 1970, the club had 156 members. The president, who naturally did her bit at the annual party, is Mrs. Pam Rideout. This club meets every Monday at the Civic Centre for whist and dominoes and bingo and tea, provided by a rota of 36 hostesses. During the year, there are outings to pantomimes, the sea and various places of interest, plus a week's holiday for more than 50 members. Those who are unable to go on holiday have a special outing instead. During the 4 years the club has been in existence, they've celebrated 3 golden weddings and 1 diamond wedding among the members, with special parties and presentations to mark the occasions. The funds of the club are raised by 3 functions during the year: a jumble sale, a morning market and a Christmas bazaar. We're looking this year at how people help themselves and help others. Some things, in fact, which may not be very well known outside the circles of the organizations which undertake them. One of the jobs which is done by the Welwyn and District Ambulance and Nursing Division of the St. John Ambulance Brigade is to supply a transport service with their expert help to the patients of Danesbury, the long-stay neurological patients who would otherwise have difficulty getting out at all. They take them to a club meeting in Barnet and on an annual outing. This is just one service which is provided by the St. John Ambulance Brigade members, but one which is being complicated by the fact that their ambulance, which belongs to the brigade, is something of a patient itself. The answer, if the brigade are going to be able to do what they want to do in the future, is not first aid for the ambulance, but something much more drastic. What they are doing is converting a second-hand van into an ambulance, doing the work themselves on spare Sunday mornings. The work involves strengthening the floor of the van and fitting it with racks to carry stretchers. It's an example of do-it-yourself which will ensure transport is there to bring people out of hospital for Christmas, and that the disabled get their outings with the help of brigade members specially trained to care for them.
Get this in, Jack, and then we can tie those seats down then.
Training for the members of the brigade can be an uncomfortable experience. A simulated motor accident, say, with realistic imitation injuries to the driver and his passenger. There's the situation. What are they going to find now they've arrived? And how are they going to cope with it? As people who may be called out to major accidents at any time, they have to know how to tackle the unexpected in the quickest possible way. The casualty, who has prepared himself with injuries his men must recognize and treat before getting him off to hospital, is Bert Ironson, the divisional superintendent. He makes it all as realistic as possible. expecting the members to approach him exactly as they would a real casualty.
Yes, it's all right. Yes, it's perfectly all right.
The idea is this. When first aiders are in the middle of an accident, it never happens in the way they've learned it from their textbooks. The only way they can be sure of being able to act instantaneously is by training in handling mock casualties. Seconds may be vital in getting a casualty off to hospital. They are trained to ensure that the casualty gets to hospital without his injuries having been made worse by clumsy first aid, and so that he's ready for the skilled attention of the doctors and surgeons which might be necessary when he gets to hospital.
That's already then.
They can safely say today that their superintendent will recover from his injuries, helped by their recognition of what was wrong and their ability to render first aid. They stand ready, these men, to be called on in case of major emergency, say a big train crash. And in the meantime, they get on with their less spectacular work of spreading their knowledge of first aid and using their skill to help the sick and the disabled, and practicing on the superintendent too, and who could be in a better position to spot their mistakes. One of the 1970 changed faces of Welwyn, or more accurately perhaps, the face is the same, the job has changed. Philip Hawley, for 14 years surveyor to Welwyn Rural District Council, walks along the Welwyn bypass road to the council offices. In June 1970, Mr. Hawley was appointed to the newly created post of clerk and surveyor, when the previous clerk, Mr. Gibson, left the rural district for the north. He took over at a vital time in the history of the rural district. The bypass road he was walking is itself to be bypassed. The whole future of Welwyn Rural District Council is in the balance. But meanwhile, there's plenty to do. For Mr. Hawley and for Bert Orsman, too. Bert Orsman is coming up to 25 years' service with the council, and since he came to Welwyn after the war. In 1970, he became Chief Financial Officer. The man in local government responsible for the health services in the area is Dr. George Taylor, the Medical Officer of Health, a face perhaps not quite so well known. Today he's been attending one of the regular Tuesday clinics at Welwyn Civic Centre. Services for infants and adults are available there. Dr. Taylor and his nurse, Miss Mary Draper, are with Mrs. Christine Hughes and her baby. The 1970 chairman of Welwyn Rural District Council was Councillor Malcolm Sanders. He represents Mardley Heath Ward on the council and has been a member for 5 years. He's a chartered engineer and is an occupational safety officer in a government research laboratory. He's married with a grown-up family. Councillor Sanders is particularly interested in protecting the rural environment. He's chairman of the Road Safety Committee and represents the RDC on the Health Committee and Executive. His home is in Digswell, and he's represented Digswell Ward on the Parish Council for 8 years and was chairman in 1968. The chairman of the Parish Council in 1970 was Councillor Godfrey Swinsko of Paynes Farm, Woolmer Green. He's been a member of the council for 5 years. Welwyn's County Councillor was elected in April 1970. He's Colin Winston, who's a computer systems analyst. After service in the Air Force, he lived and worked abroad until 1960. He's married with 3 children. In 1966, he was elected to Welwyn RDC and has been chairman of the council and of the Finance Committee. He first went to the County Council in a by-election in 1969. During 1970, every ratepayer in Welwyn Rural District had a new guide to the district delivered to his door. It was prepared by the Welwyn Society in cooperation with the Rural District Council. Volunteers from the Society roped in their children to help pack the booklets into envelopes ready for delivery by hand. The booklet was accompanied by a detailed map of the district prepared by Philip Hawley, listing all the streets and bridleways and places of interest. The cover of the booklet was designed and drawn by Alfred Harwood, an artist who works on Farmers Weekly in London and who lives in Oaklands. He turned out to help with the distribution too. Delivering getting on for 3,000 copies of the guide was accomplished in a day by volunteers in cars ferrying children and their addressed envelopes to the various areas of the rural district. The booklet contains detailed factual information about the district, useful both to the people who live here and to prospective residents. It lists the clubs and organizations available in the area, the shops and the services, and has articles on the history of the village too. As 1970 was drawing to a close, Welwyn Round Table again took Father Christmas into the streets to collect money for their annual undertaking to deliver Christmas parcels to old people in the district. It was a pleasant seasonal reminder that Christmas is a time of giving, and that as one gets older, there can be rather less perhaps to receive. Perhaps the children didn't realize as they put their old pence in a Christmas collecting box for the last time that the money was going to make Christmas better for people very much older than themselves. The people older than themselves that we've been talking a good deal about in Welwyn 1970.